We're at Romford Film Festival, and I am with Michael Sagatis, who is the maker of Jozefa's Letters. Michael, can you tell us a little bit about your film?
Thanks, Spencer. Thanks for having it and letting me be here. The film Jozefa's Letters is the result of what I could use the word chance discovery of a collection of artifacts, historical artifacts that I knew that they were related to an ancestor, but I had no idea that the conditions of which these letters were written, and they surfaced as the result of another family member who'd been hoarding them as part of a huge collection of personal possessions and items that this family member, who's an aunt, had accumulated over her life. And after she'd passed away, there was a huge process of having to sort through, and in the sorting, this collection of letters would appear in my hands as something that nobody knew where they were or which bag or box, because there was just hundreds and hundreds of bags and boxes. But as the letters were found, it was almost like a challenge to be able to say, well, what are you going to do about them now? I mean, they had clearly survived for decades. They could have gone back into another box now and just put somewhere more sensible and stored for someone else to think about. But I took it upon myself to understand what was this piece. And I think I was at a point in my life when I was very curious about the shape and state of our family history with regards to my own family right now and to the generations before, and kind of understood that these letters represented a piece of a genealogical puzzle, and I didn't know how they fitted and what kind of image they were going to make once we kind of knew more about them, but I knew that they had to be researched. So the research of the letters took place, and as the research grew into what was initially a family history project to get the help of family members to help piece together what who the author of the letters was, Jozefa, and then that evolved into from family history into historical memory, taking into account the events of the time period in which they were written. So that's part of the 20th century history of Eastern Europe, especially specifically with reference to what happened during the Second World War. And so we brought these two themes together: the family history, historical memory, events that caused the creation of these letters. And I think there was a certain point when enough material had been generated that an exhibition was held, and it was during that exhibition that we decided that we'd film the exhibition and also then cut it with the narration of setting the context as to why this exhibition is being held. So that is how Jozefa's Letters came about, as a final realization of all the research that had taken place, all the creative expressions that had emerged from as a result of this research, all coming together in one point. And at that one point, because the location of where the film was made was so powerful, because it was a reconstructed prison camp, it couldn't have been a more apt and appropriate setting.
The film captivated me from the very moment I saw you walking towards the building. It's a very, very powerful shot, I think. What is your filmmaking background? Do you have any?
I don't have any specific previous filmmaking background, but I've always been interested and comfortable behind the camera. And so as a hobby creative, my main mediums that I've enjoyed the most are music and image making, either through photography and video. So I've made lots of hobby videos, taken and progressed significantly up my camera models, going from the most basic digital cameras up to DSLRs, and have used that to be able to achieved what I've needed to do for film and video. But I knew that this project that I was about to embark on was going to be very content heavy, because I was setting myself out to go out and visit lots of places, do lots of research, and needed to document as much of it as possible. But whilst I was able to document stuff a lot with my camera, I knew that I couldn't, just on my own, with just the one camera, create the film that was needed to the quality that we were aiming for this location. So whilst I was in Ukraine having the Ukrainian kind of tour of the exhibition, leg of the tour, I was able to connect there with just people that had told me that if you're going to have this exhibition in this particular location, you've got to film it. And we were able to use that goodwill to be able to say, right, we're going to work together to make it happen.
Can you tell us a little bit about the music design, because obviously music plays very heavily in the film?
Yes, there is a significant time count given over to just the performance of live music, and the music, when we were for me from the beginning, when I had discovered the letters, going back to the aunt who passed away, leaving behind a lot of things, another artifact that emerged was a cassette, and that cassette contained a piece of music, and it was just something that my father kind of handed to me just during that phase of sorting, to say, oh, here's something for you to listen to. It's something I'd composed when I was young. It's just on this cassette, which sounded very old and as if it had really been recorded, years and years before, bad quality recording. But the piece of music was extremely powerful, and I didn't know how. My dad kind of just passed it off as just, it was something that I'd kind of put together when I was a young man. I was going through, I think he refers to it as his kind of Chopin phase, when he was listening to a lot of nocturnes, and he was getting inspired by a lot of the kind of harmonic progressions that you would hear, because the piece is very Chopin-esque in that respect to a short nocturne. And so whilst hearing this piece, again, even before this had become a project, I was just another kind of artifact that was quite shocking and a discovery. But then later, as the letters would become, the letters and the music were discovered at the same location in roughly the same time frame. So as the letters would become decoded, and the sense and the voice of what the letters were what was being written about in the letters, it was, I could hear the music, and I could get the sense of the emotion from the music from hearing it from the cassette. But because the letters needed at least a full year of professionals to decode them, so for me to really get the real sense of the letters, it was only then that once they'd been decoded and translated did I realize that there's something very auspiciously connected between what's coming out from the letters and the music. So the music then took on this role of just being an absolutely natural, appointed soundtrack to this story, because they sounded so clear echoes of each other, and it made even stronger by the fact that the composer of the music and the author of the letters are related, that it's the grandson. And so that then seemed to me like that had to be developed. But me, as someone that wanted to try and tie it in together formally, I realized that I couldn't rely on just this old recording. So I had to, as a musician, as a hobby musician myself, kind of, and liking to have a network of real musician friends who are professionals, I sent the recording to a professional musician who listened to this 4-minute piano piece, and he notated it by ear, and he wrote out all the notes, which is just a genius act in my opinion there, and sent me back a musical score. And with that musical score I was able then to learn the piece and then be able to perform that piece, but also then work with other musicians to develop that piece to actually get the final sound that's going to be the sound of the used in the film, and as part of the performance aspect, of which this film has the performance of compositions from both myself and my father. Yeah.
The one thing that I found really fascinating was in her letters she was always so upbeat. There was always that optimism, wasn't there?
Well, Jozefa's voice changes depending on which daughter she wrote to, and Jozefa's content about what she's writing about clearly changes depending on which point in her exile she's writing from. So in the early stages of the exile, she's still writing like a mother who is in charge of the family, and she is the family matriarch. She's made 6 children, and by the time the war starts and she's been deported, there are 5 alive. 5 are alive, and each of these are starting and have made their own families. They're all young parents themselves, but clearly that bond is very strong with their mother, and so Jozefa uses that as a device within her letters, a device to still confer her power to her children and to get and effectively manipulate them to be able to get what she thinks she needs. But as time goes on within this year's period, because she writes these letters within about a 12-month time frame, I mean, her situation becomes a lot more tenuous and desperate, and the letters certainly, whilst maybe having an optimism of return, it soon gives way to a desperation that there is no hope, and there's no return. And certainly, yes, all optimism evaporates.
Yeah. I mean, from me as an outsider, obviously, I suppose you would, having that family history, you're going to know more to it. But I was uplifted by, certainly in the early stages. I mean, for me, the only really negative letter that I saw was, the penultimate, maybe last letter that comes out in the film, and I just think I think that that's such a strength, that all that optimism all the way through it. But I suppose there is always that element of you don't know what's happening. No, but everyone was in that ball of, you're waiting, I suppose, almost in a degree the way we are now. We are waiting for the outcome of COVID-19 and what is going to happen at the end. We're all looking forward, and we're stuck in this
limbo state. I mean, quarantine is kind of like a form of repression from being, having your liberties removed, for sure. But Jozefa's particular circumstances, I think, are now being repeated right now in Belarus as the results of a racist and xenophobic regime that's ruthless to its people. Mm-hmm. And that's what was the regime that was happening then, that forcibly tore Jozefa from her family.
Yes.
and exiled her thousands of kilometers to a middle of nowhere location where she was forced to work for strangers, to eventually have her body and spirit crushed and given way to overworking, which was part of that the Soviet policies at that time, when these settlers and labeled traitors to the party were forced to still do manual labor. And so she would we are seeing now that even just at this very second in Belarus, just as where Jozefa was taken, there are people being beaten by the current regime because of similar racist, xenophobic policies. Yeah.
No disrespect when I say this, but I'm sure Jozefa's story is not potentially is something that a lot of families will have a similar, perhaps, history. Whether the circumstances are different. So just say, for example, that someone discovered that they had this hoard of letters. What guidance would you give them for how they would take those steps from getting, what sort of steps did you take from the translation to getting people involved? Have you got any guidance that would point people in the right direction? Because sometimes people do have these stories, but they just don't know what avenue to take to get that story out there, or even if it's just for themselves.
Yeah. So, for absolutely, Spencer, you're absolutely correct that this is the story of so many Slavic nations, whereas Jozefa was a resident of Eastern Poland that was one of the territories that would have been occupied by the Red Army at the start of World War II, but as was Lithuania, Ukraine, the Baltics. So many of these territories have similar stories of where those that were deemed to be enemies of the state were arrested, exiled, or executed. Again, not dissimilar to what's happening right now in Belarus. And whilst then those stories are there, of course many remain in oblivion and will never be. There are no documents, there is nothing there, and there is a lot of unknown facts that possibly no one can ever then find out and dig up, or unless you are going to approach it from basically one of two ways. So one is you do find a collection of artifacts which are able to guide you, or the other way is you must go to the archives and start, if you are really keen to know more information about your ancestors, if you believe them, for example, if they're coming from the Slavic countries of which experienced repression, then you need to write directly to the archives, which are becoming much more open than they have been. But still there are difficulties with certain archives in certain countries, namely Belarus, namely some of the more secret archives of the KGB in Moscow are not so open. Ukraine archives are more transparent, as is Polish. With regards to finding, though, if you found a cache of letters, you need to really use the services of a philologist who can decode. If you're not able to read them, and very few people are these days able to read something that comes back from 80 years ago from an obscure dialect, so Jozefa's letters from the territory that she wrote them from, it was an obscure dialect. It's not clear, pure Polish, it's not Russian or Belarusian, it's a mix. So someone being a philologist, who I had to find through recommendations, starting with a translator. So a translator is not really even a philologist. A translator is more just, okay, this is a source text and I need it into this language. But a philologist is going to take your images and divide them up into sections and zoom in and do detailed analysis on each section to try and decode what's been written there. So, yeah, letters with something that you can't really read, you need a philologist. Yeah. For more information about what happened to that family member, archives and writing to the archives with as much information as you can provide and following their protocols. And the third element would be to get as many of your other family relatives who are still alive from that period or have references to that period to try and share with them their histories and look at their photo albums for more clues, which is what happened here as well in this historical project. So many more clues and images and data came back from just being able to reach out and connect with the descendants of other branches of the family tree. Yeah.
What is next for the project, and what is the future in terms of you currently being the custodian of the letters?
Yes. Having already done some then travels to Belarus to look at some of the actual living spaces of where the letters were sent to, also went to Kazakhstan and started doing some filming there of the location that Jozefa was sent to, was able to work with local cultural centre to establish that location, which the final kind of resting point, as it were where Jozefa was sent, a collective farm in the middle of the great Kazakh kind of northwestern plain, known as the steppe, the great steppes of Kazakhstan. Last year I was out there and was able to work with a couple of drone operator guys, and we got some good, really perfect weather condition type shots of just this vastness, and it's something now that I'd like to explore with the next tying in of how those conditions could be next shown on film, which could be tied into a documentary feature about the discovery of the letters and the conditions under which they were written. So that's one potential future path for the film, and still also looking and working with some script writers as to see how a story connecting again the generations in a kind of a multi-generational view of the film could work, how that could work as a scripted film.
For those that haven't been able to see it at the film festival, what are you doing now to ensure that other people can discover the film?
I've got access to be able to see it through my Vimeo platform. We've also got a chance to see it through social media, as on my Facebook and LinkedIn. It's also advertised in the program brochure, so I would encourage anyone else that's still interested to come down to the film festival this week to get in touch if they were interested to see. I'm happy to also to reach out over social media.
Well, thank you very much for first allowing the festivals to show your film, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.